9001 Basic Training, Requirements, Documentation, Corrective Action, and Improvement. Thanks for joining us today. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been working with companies for over 15 years implementing quality management systems. I've got a degree in industrial engineering and an MBA in quality management, and I've been a professional trainer as well as a consultant to many different organizations for their quality management systems certification and revitalization. One of the things I love to do is go into a company like one somebody was talking about just before the call, before we started recording, where we're doing it kind of because we have to and they don't really see the benefit, and revitalize it. Some people have been, just joined a company that's got a certified system in full swing and they never got the basic training. What does the book really say? Well, that's what today is about. I'm going to put a couple commercials up front before we get into the content, though, while I have you here. The DeSera Group does business effectiveness with our clients. We work with leaders in organizations on their strategy and quality planning and some benchmarking against best in class. We help with business process improvements using tools like Lean and Six Sigma, Kaizen events. We're having a call on that on Kaizen events. In fact, tomorrow you can go to our website and sign up on that. Sign up for that if you're interested in what that means. It's a remarkable way to get fast improvements in productivity. And a lot of what we do is working with companies on their management systems when they need to expand the scope of their registration. Maybe they've had a merger, maybe things have moved around quite a bit, and they need to revitalize or implement from scratch. Now here's the commercial part. At the end of June, June 29th, 30th, and July 1st, we're putting on a conference called the 2010 Productivity Reset, Increasing Personal, Team, and Organizational Effectiveness. It is a virtual conference, so you'll attend just like you're attending this webinar today. No travel required. You'll be online with a live presenter. There will be a chance for you to enter questions online. We'll have some moderated Q&A sessions. And the first day is about personal productivity, the second team productivity, and the third is organizational productivity. I can't announce the speakers yet because I'm still confirming the people that we've got, but I will tell you that there are people who are talking about books that have been published in these areas. I got a guy who has dealt with, I believe he's going to say yes, he's dealt with professional Olympic athletes up in Canada. His company deals with Olympic athletes and applying those principles to business all over the world. So I'm really excited about having him. Another woman who's dealt with the government, with the Prime Minister's office in Canada and many large corporations on productivity for individuals. She's a shadow coach, follows them around and talks about what does it take to manage email and lots of competing projects. It's only $797 for your site license for up to 20 people. Basically, as many as you can put in a conference room together can attend. People can come and go, listen to the sessions that they want. We've made it ridiculously inexpensive so that people will come and get introduced to some of this stuff so that hopefully going forward you have a positive attitude towards us, towards some of the people who will be speaking, and can make some decisions as to what you may want to do going forward in increasing productivity in your life and your business. We also are offering more and more virtual courses. We're doing this with our clients, and now we're opening it up to the public because many people don't have enough people to have an on-site class. So what we're offering is a virtual training course. The first one coming up, the next one coming up, I should say, it's actually our first public one, May 25th and 26th. It's called Process-Based Audits for Business Improvement. You'll attend 2 full days from your computer. I suggest you do it from home if you've got a quiet place or from a conference room, and you'll get all the background exercises, templates, and takeaway, plus recordings of the course, and it will be significantly reduced in price. I believe we're offering it at $597. Don't quote me on that, even though we're on tape, but I believe it's $597 with discounts for webinar attendees. You'll be getting email about that, and we'll have one on basic audit skills in July, and we've got some other things coming along. And now into the meat of the presentation. Understanding ISO 9001. I give an analogy of how I explained this to my parents. We'll talk about documents and records with what I call the law of Goldilocks. Corrective action, an auditor's playground, why auditors start there, and how to avoid the diving catch. Getting involved with process management so you have actually quantitative-based improvements in your business. And I'll stay on the call afterwards. It says for information on grants. I'll do some of that if anyone's interested, also about other training opportunities, and anything you'd like to talk about in your personal situation that you may not like to have on the recording today. Well, this story starts with, to tell you about basic training for ISO 9001. I have found that sometimes putting it in plain English is what helps people remember what it is and be able to explain it to other people. So I was out in California with my parents a few years ago. I'd flown out for a 4-hour presentation on TL 9000, which is the standard I've helped write. And my dad said, well, what do you do anyway? And I handed him the standard and I said, I teach this stuff. Well, he wanted it in plain English, so there, sitting on their patio, I had a talk with him. And I said, think back to 1957 when you guys first decided to get married. We had a nice little talk over lunch, and we talked about how they defined their roles and responsibilities. I mean, that's what it is in manager speak, but in 1957 it was just kind of, well, of course, Mom would keep the house and Dad would fly the airplanes and take care of the yard and the garden and run the cars, and they'd live happily ever after. Well, I said, actually, Mom and Dad, according to ISO 9001, because I do understand you got it back then, what you did then was you set goals. As the management team of the Lingo family, you set goals. And I know based on the results that you got that you set goals to have a family that's faithful and healthy and educated and orderly. After all, we had a military pilot and a woman who was raised on Father Knows Best and so forth. And after you did that, you said, well, if we're going to have a family, there's a lot of stuff we're going to need. We need a house to live in because base officer quarters won't work anymore for Dad. Well, he wasn't a dad yet. The motorcycle won't work. Kind of hard to put a car seat on that if we're going to have kids. We're going to need tools inside and outside the house and furnishings. And then we need to learn how to be married, how to be parents. My mom said parenting wasn't a verb in 1957. And I said, gee, I wonder when to parent became a verb. And she said, probably sometime in the 70s. Anyway, how to keep the home and garden and how to survive in suburbia. They needed skills. They had to learn how to do those things. And then the more children that they had and the larger houses that they got and the more cars they had and more complicated they got, kind of hard to change your own oil when things got pretty computerized, their skills changed over the years. And the needs of training their staff, a.k.a. children, changed and grew over time. So they continued to need to upgrade resources based on those goals, the fundamental goals they had for the family. And I said, Mom and Dad, what you did as parents, you didn't realize it, but you were running according to ISO 9001. You had methods. ISO 9001 requires methods. You had methods, such as family standards. In our family, the standards didn't come from the government or from written down standards, but they came from family traditions and schedules that were dictated by the schools as well as by the family. Manners, common sense manners and rules, because if you're going to have a bunch of kids running around, you've got to be able to do things in a systematic way, especially if you're a fighter pilot. We had community standards. We all had chores we had to participate in, and Mom had her ways of doing things like shopping and meal planning. She'd put a meal plan out for the week and shop once a week. I mean, that's how you did it when you only had one car back in those days, no microwave oven. Laundry was a big event with hanging things out on the line. And, of course, we all had to keep things in good condition because things weren't quite disposable with the way they are now. So we talked about they didn't just kind of haphazardly run a family. They had a pretty efficient family, and it kept with their goals of being orderly. But they didn't wait to see if we turned out to be hoodlums and went to jail or if we turned out to go to the college of their choice. They checked us out along the way. On a daily basis, they were measuring and monitoring our behavior and our performance with things like grades and spelling tests, merit badges and football scores. We had household inspections with my mom every Saturday morning before we were allowed to go out and play, and the finished product of the school papers were often inspected before we could go off to hand the work in. And if we weren't cutting it, we had various forms of what business calls corrective action. Unfortunately, we can't spank our employees who don't turn in corrective action reports on time. Sometimes we only wish we could ground them or take away their allowance, but it doesn't work that way. But, of course, it wasn't just a matter of punishment. There were lessons, there were tutoring, there were coaching, and there were ample opportunities for retraining, meaning somebody got to do somebody else's chores until they learned how to do it right. So as I explained that stuff to my parents, and we had some laughs along the way, it took a lot longer than that over lunch to reminisce and so forth. My dad said, well, that's just living life. What's that got to do with what people pay you for? And I pointed out that they had successfully achieved the results. There they are with their 4 kids and a couple of grandchildren a few years ago. That tribe has grown a little bit since then. I'm the one with a kid on my lap. I said, Mom and Dad, let's compare the analogy from what business said from what you guys did to what business says. Well, where you guys as a family started out, and my mom said it wasn't nearly that well defined, Karen. We just sort of did those things. I said, all right, well, go with me on the analogy here. What a company has to do at the top management is responsible for defining what the company is going to promise its customers. And they have to make the plans to reach those goals and have to communicate to their organization what it is we're trying to do around here. Now, some companies will decide that we're going to go in and be the copycats. We're not looking for having the top-of-the-line, most innovative products. We're looking for a good value, good price, on-time delivery, and people are going to pay less than they would pay for those feature-rich, first-to-market type products. That's a quality objective, okay? They may have certain goals for reliability. Where I deal with the telecom world and other high-tech products, there are companies who flat out recognize that they're going to go to market with some bugs. I mean, you just don't put a software product out there. You just can't test a software product to the point where it's not going to have some bugs. You define what the risks are going to be and where you're going to come in the marketplace, and that's part of the management team's goals. How much risk are we going to take on in what we put out there into the marketplace in comparison to speed and cost that we're delivering to the customers? So top management has to say, where are we going to come in here, and what are our plans and the measurable objectives and the number of people that we're going to have? How are we going to staff up to fill those resources? Just like Mom and Dad had to come up with a house and car and furnishings and the skills that they needed, the business has to come up with the infrastructure it needs, the plant, the offices, the equipment suitable for achieving those goals. So if you say we're going to have 100% on-time delivery, you've got to have the infrastructure available to achieve that goal. If you say we're going to have 24/7 global customer support, you've got to have the infrastructure and the trained individuals to support that. If you say we're going to have a certain level of quality in the product, is your process even capable of producing that quality? You've got to have the equipment and keep it maintained, as well as the people who are trained with the skills to do the job, people who are skilled for solving problems and for continually improving. So a business has to set up what are its goals and then apply the appropriate resources. Those are the first two things in ISO 9001 that it talks about, after it talks about some preliminary stuff about the process approach to management and stuff about documentation, which we'll cover in the second half of this presentation. Third, just like Mom and Dad did things according to traditions and rules and schedules and manners and chore charts and check rides on the lawnmower to be sure that we weren't going to cut our feet off and we weren't going to leave garbage all over the lawn after we finished cutting, the company defines the methods for ensuring that the work that they do consistently fulfills customer needs and business objectives. So when a company sets up written and documented procedures, it's not doing it so that it can fulfill ISO 9001. If a company has so much documentation that's never referenced, that it feels like, oh, these are our ISO procedures and here's how we really do things around here, that's not what ISO 9001 is talking about. ISO 9001 is talking about defining the processes and an appropriate level of documented instructions to complement the training for the activities such as sales and product development, purchasing, building product or providing services, and keeping things in good condition. So a company has to define the methods by which it will build and make sure that it's able to measure and provide that product in a way that the customers want. All of that in keeping with the goals that were established at the top. All right, so Mom and Dad did those things with the idea of getting children into college and having productive citizens, and they measured our spelling tests and our project reports and our merit badges, but also how we were getting our results. They didn't want us cheating on exams. They didn't want us starving ourselves to maintain our goal weight or living on junk food. Whoops. What's that? Okay. I got a new little keyboard thing here, keyboard specialty. What the company was doing, what a company has to do in those cases is perform checks on its business processes as well as on its product. So a company, according to ISO 9001, needs to monitor its products and its services to be sure that they meet the specifications, that customers are satisfied with the products, that the processes themselves are being followed. And how do you know if the processes are being followed? Well, you look at in-process targets and whether they're consistently being met. So while Mom and Dad had a target of sending children to college, they didn't wait to see if we got in. They checked the quarterly grade reports and things. The business checks to see if the ovens are the right temperature and the whip is at the right level and the first pass yield is at the right level and so forth, so that defects can be removed and resolved and not even created within the business. The objective of ISO 9001 really is to say, let's figure out what the causes of problems are, identify and permanently correct them so that we can do a better job of achieving our goals long term and deliver what the customer wants. Now, let's get a little bit away from the analogy and talk about what ISO 9001 really requires. Oh, I forgot to mention, remember all that written down stuff? This is really the pool it all swims in. ISO 9001 in Clause 4, before it talks about goal setting or resources or how you do the work or how you check the work, ISO 9001 says you need to have a documented management system. And actually the requirements for documentation are pretty minimal. I mean, it just says you have to have a document for controlling documents and records. You have to have a document for controlling non-conforming material, a document for how you do your internal audits. You have to have a document for how you do corrective action and a document for how you do preventive action. Now, if you can run a business with only those 6 documented procedures, hats off. You know, maybe it's you and one other person, in which case ISO might not be the most applicable model for you. Typically, you need, and it says in Clause 4, whatever documentation you need to get the point across so that things are done consistently throughout the business to meet customer and business objectives. Also, in Clause 4, it says you have to keep records so that you can prove you've actually done, so that you can verify that you took the steps, performed the work in the manner that it was prescribed to be performed. And those records also help you go back and say, maybe we could have done it differently and achieved a better result or achieved it more cost effectively. So records are all designed to help you, not to satisfy an auditor. So Clause 4 of ISO 9001 says document your system and keep records, and it does describe some specific things that you have to document, your quality manual and how you define, or that you define, the sequence and interaction of the processes that run the business. Now, top management is responsible for setting the goals of the business. There are things listed in management responsibility that management alone is responsible for. You cannot have a grassroots campaign for what it is we're going to achieve around here. You're going to have people who want to be best in class and people who want to be, low cost, get it out the door, let's make some bucks, and not dissatisfy anyone. Also, management is the only part of the business that can truly provide the resources, that can say, here's what we're going to spend on plant and equipment, here's what we're going to spend on people, on training, here's how many people we're going to hire. So the green boxes, as described in Clause 5 and Clause 6 as being defined in your quality management system, really are the responsibility of management. It doesn't say management in providing resources, but really that's where those kinds of decisions are made. Everyone in the business shares responsibility for working according to consistent methods. Everyone, yes, everyone, because anybody in the business can do something that can mess up the business. I had a situation once in a company where quality was empowered to put things on hold. If it doesn't meet specifications, if there's risk of getting it out to the customer, quality was to tell production, you may not ship. Well, the production manager was really incensed that quality had this authority over him and went running into the cafeteria to find the area vice president, said, "Oh, boss, they're not letting us ship, and you told me this order was ultra important and we were going to lose this customer if we didn't ship." And the area director said, "Well, go ahead and ship it." And the guy said, "Quality won't let me ship without a deviation from you." So the guy grabbed his napkin, wrote, "Ship it," handed it to the production manager, and off he ran to go ship his product that quality had said was at risk. So when I say that everybody's responsible for defining and using consistent methods, that was a method I wouldn't say it was going to be particularly effective. Okay, when a top manager or a manager anywhere along the line goes against those methods that have been defined, they're just undermining the whole system overall. So everyone shares responsibility for defining and using consistent methods. Now, before you jump all over me about did the guy have the authority and might that have been the right thing to do, who knows? I gave you an abbreviated version of the story. He may have had a lot more information on that problem than I had, and it was the right thing to do. But when you tell it in that way, it looks like a very wrong decision that was undermining the quality management system. All right, everyone is responsible for performing and acting on the checks on the system. When something goes wrong, don't do the diving catch. Don't just fix it for this time and hope it never happens again. Don't just work around it or flog the employee who made the mistake. Actually, improve the system overall. That's responsibility of everyone. And here's a table. When you download it, if you need to explain this to some other people, you may want to use a chart like this that shows really this is what ISO 9001 says. And when I teach an internal audit class or when I teach an implementation class, I start here. In fact, I start with having people do an exercise of filling in a chart like this. I give them a deck of sticky notes and I say, write down the responsibilities this business has for making sure that product gets to market in a way that's actually going to sell. They get a lot of sticky notes out on the wall and I say, group them into the things that management is responsible for and the things that everyone shares responsibility for. And it's amazing. If you get enough smart people in a room together, they pretty much come up with a list that looks something like this. And they're like, you mean ISO thought of that? And I say, no, sorry, my mom and dad thought of that in 1957. And they don't believe me, but that's my little joke when I explain it to them, that it really is common sense that you set the goals for your business or your life. You provide the resources. You perform according to a plan and systematic methods that get you where you're going to go. And then you check yourself on the way. You fix problems, and you make sure that you don't make the same mistakes again. The only difference there is documenting the system is something that a business may do that a family won't. Yeah, unless you're my mom. We had documented work instructions for cleaning the kitchen. If she had had access to a digital camera, we would have had digitally mastered work instructions to follow. We did have those inspections, like I said. So that's basically, I'm going to flip back there and say that's kind of a summary. Well, that is the summary of what ISO 9001 requires. But where people get all wrapped up in answering to audit nonconformities, where people say, gee, you don't have it properly documented. Gee, we need to create a document for that. You know, our procedures aren't accurate, or we got dinged on not having the right names and dates and signatures on things. Well, ISO 9001 does require documenting the system, so let's go through that now. That's one of the promises I made for this webinar on basic training. So ISO 9001 requires a documented procedure to control documentation. That may sound like overkill, but when I go into companies that have they've kind of grown through an entrepreneur just building things up the way they think it ought to be. I went into a company a couple weeks ago where they had an online directory, on a shared directory of all the forms they were supposed to use. And I said, okay, well, when you're going to create a new part, can you show me a form that allows everybody to know what the new part's going to be, how it's going to get numbered, and so forth? Oh, yeah, our new part introduction form. When I looked on their shared directory, they had about 6 versions of it. There was no control over the form that everybody was using. People were tweaking it. People had their own versions of it with certain fields filled in, and they were all available on the shared directory. No surprise, I went out into production, and there were the documented work instructions based on national standards for how things were supposed to be color-coded and all this stuff. And they had all these handwritten markings that supervisors and workers had put on there over the years, their cheat sheets, their notes, the things that actually worked better than what was written down on the form. Well, what if you ever pulled an original copy of that form that had all the handwritten stuff on it? What if somebody decided to clean out their drawer, left the company, and took all their little notes with them? So what ISO 9001 says is documents of the quality management system have to actually be approved. So those cheat sheet notes, were they accurate or were they missing some steps? And did they get on everyone's copy of it? So are they approved? Are they reviewed and updated, available in their relevant versions? So my sticky notes actually make it into a current version that's available to everyone who might need to pull a copy of it. And when it says legible and readily identifiable, I went into a company that had all of their process flow maps written in Visio, Microsoft Visio. The problem was people who needed to use them didn't have licenses to use Microsoft Visio, so no one could actually pull the copies online. They had to go and ask the engineer to make them a copy right there, and people just didn't do it. They didn't go to the trouble. They got one copy and kept it forever, and there may have been changes and so forth. So when it says legible, it's not just talking neat and tidy. It's talking in a form people can use and can't change. So if you put a Word document out there that's not password protected, that's not protecting it from being reviewed and approved prior to use. So there are rules in there that are very general about approval and review and available and legible and identifiable, meaning there needs to be a date and a part number or a document number on it. It's up to you how you do that, but there are a lot of watch-outs that somebody inexperienced in a system. I mean, when I go into a company with an ISO 9001 certified system and I look at how many additional work instructions have been written, they're actually work instructions in an area because somebody decided this needed to be written down, and they're not dated, they're not named, the owner doesn't know, people don't know who actually wrote it down in case it needs to be changed. ISO actually sets up a really good system for this, and I'll give you an example of the cobbler's children have no shoes. I set a couple of my colleagues out to put on a webinar. I do a lot more webinars than any of the rest because personally I like to work from home. And so I do a lot of the web-based training, and I'm very comfortable with the tools. Well, one of my colleagues got on the line to do a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and the sound didn't work, and they couldn't unmute people properly, and it was just a mess. I mean, it really reflected badly on our process for putting these things on when we have other programs people are actually paying to attend with this. And I thought, Karen, where is the work instruction for how we do webinars around here? So I wrote a work instruction. And I did it really fast because people were beating me up about it. I did it really fast, wrote it into an email, and sent it off to everyone. With at the top, I put the heading, Save This Procedure. And then I thought, Karen, we teach this stuff. This needs to be on our shared directory so when somebody's in the middle of a webinar and forgets or is preparing for a webinar, they can actually pull it and have the stuff there. So it's real easy when you even when you're in a compliant or certified system, to just forget that having things approved, reviewed, available, and legible is very important, that they not be just stuffed in somebody's email someplace. You have your ISO procedures and you have your real procedures. Put the real procedures under control. It really does pay. Now, documents of external origin have to be controlled. Documents of external origin. All right. I was dealing with a client a little while back that had specific requirements from AT&T about how certain things were supposed to be done, like standard workmanship procedures. They were in a binder. They'd been in that binder since 2004 on the production floor. Well, if AT&T ever changed their ways, they'd let us know. Engineering would bring them out to the floor and provide them to us. And I said, do you really think AT&T hasn't changed in 6 years? Heck, they haven't even had the same name for 6 years. Everybody laughed, and I said, come on, how do you know that these standard workmanship instructions haven't changed? And so when it says documents of external origin must be controlled, it says when customers or international standards or vendors give you something, how do you know where those copies have been placed in your organization? Who has copies and who needs to be notified if they get updated? Now, in my client's defense, very small operation, I really do think that the changes would have gotten through. These were very, very common work instructions, so probably there wasn't any risk there, but the point was they didn't have a system for it. Okay, then finally, obsolete documents must be prevented from unintended use. Certainly, you may need to keep copies of old Rev documents because you need to prove that something happened that way previously, or you have service requirements where you need to have old drawings and old work instructions. Just make sure that they're not out there mixed in with other things. Obsolete documents would be the old version after the new version has come out and people are still working on the copy they've handwritten on. No, that's not good. So that's the kind of thing an auditor will catch you on, and you have to catch yourself on it. Now, the promised law of Goldilocks. What are the requirements of documents and records? In ISO 9001, it says documentation needs to be just right. Not too hot, not too big, not too small, not too hard, not too soft, not too hot, and not too cold. Those aren't actually the words they use. They say something along the lines of appropriate to the needs of the organization and in a form suitable to the operation. Well, I didn't exactly quote them, but what I'm saying is they give you a lot of leeway as to the form and how many documents and how they're going to be written and so forth. So what is just right for your organization? Your auditor doesn't get to tell you what that is, and the customer doesn't get to tell you what documentation is just right. So who does get to tell you what's just right documentation? It's not the quality department. Just right depends on the criticality to the business and to the customer. So you're looking at the risk of insufficient documentation, and I didn't write it down, but I should have written the risk of over-documentation. Okay, if you over-document some stuff, my dad, the pilot, said, if we ever did everything in the book, we'd never get off the ground. And I thought, my gosh, with the number of flights I take, he actually talked about it when we were talking about ISO 9001 that day. I thought, don't tell me that with the number of flights I take. I really hope you're doing everything in the book. Over-documenting means that you're writing so many things down that people couldn't possibly comply. And I've heard about this from people who have served in the military, the reams and reams and reams of documentation. But maybe they're needed for something. So maybe you need an official version and an at-the-workspace version. You just need to be sure that they're kept consistent. The just right documentation depends on how many people do the job. All right, if only one person does the job, you're likely to need documentation. The answer to just about every question I'm going to ask you is it depends. But let's just think about it. If only one person does the job, does it daily, it's really straightforward, such as sweeping the floor. Does it need to be documented? Well, that depends. I had one guy who swept the floor in the printed circuit board factory. And those of you who aren't familiar with printed circuit boards may not know that if you sweep with the wrong types of materials or sweep at all, I mean, you have to clean in an appropriate way that doesn't damage the product that may be work in process on the floor, or you're going to have early life failures on that stuff. So sweeping the floor, or cleaning it in any case, or cleaning the floor in an operating room or a clean room where certain types of products are made may be critical. And even though one person does it, it may need to be written down. So ask yourself on the just right documentation, what is the criticality to the business, to the customer, to the product of having insufficient documentation? Include the qualification of the people doing the job and the business needs surrounding the format, paper, electronic, pictures, text, audio. You got a workshop for the blind, you may need to have work instructions in audio format or in Braille. You may need to have work instructions that can withstand chemicals being used in the area so that they're stamped on machinery in text that's not going to rub off. You may have a sheltered workforce environment with people who can't read or write, or many, many different languages being spoken in the area where you are. Are you going to use pictures? Are you going to use multiple languages of instructions? How will you do that? So the business needs matter. Now, when it says qualifications of people doing the job, there are certain things that you want to have written down and have people following the written version regardless of where they are and who they are. I had a situation where a guy had written the procedure for how to shut down the system and start it back up again, because this was a system that was critical to communicating mobile phone calls to the 911 system. So if you're driving down the road and you call 911 and you want the ambulance to be routed to the right location, you want this guy's system to work. So he was going to take the system down for maintenance, and it was going to go over to the alternate system in another state, just the way he always does it. And he just went in there and flipped all the switches the way he always does according to the procedure that he wrote but has never taken off the bookshelf or pulled off the computer because he always does it that way. Yeah, well, he forgot that one of the requirements on that list was double check that the other system is up before you convert over to it. I mean, one of those really simple things that somebody ought to do, that it's not down for its own PM or that it's not having a problem before you shut down. the guy shut down his system and basically shut down the ability to transmit 911 calls for an hour. You wouldn't want to be one of the people in an accident at that point, right? Heads did roll. The FCC was notified. Now, I don't want you guys to go back and trace that thing that could have happened any time in the last 10 years. The idea is that even though the person who did the job may be extremely competent, there's certain things you want to have out there in front of you. You want your surgeon to go through the documentation before they perform the procedure, right? Okay, so the law of Goldilocks. Documentation needs to be just right. It depends on business needs, and you need to evaluate just right by the effectiveness of the documentation. I highlight effectiveness because that means, is the job consistently performed correctly, and is the documentation useful in maintaining consistent performance? I'm not saying that every individual has to have the documentation open and available and following it every step of the way. But if you had to teach a new person to do it or bring a new person in to do a job they haven't done in a while, is it useful in maintaining consistent performance? Do not let an auditor tell you that something must be written down or that the corrective action for this problem is to write down a new procedure. Evaluate your documentation on whether it's actually whether the documentation is actually going to ensure that the job is performed consistently and correctly. Okay, speaking of corrective action, this is the third point that I wanted to cover in this webinar, and I call it an auditor's playground because whenever I start an audit, and by the way, when I say I audit, I'm not a registrar auditor. The Becerra Group does not do registration audits, and that's one of the things that allows us to work very closely with our clients. We can go out and perform an internal audit for a company. Basically, we're functioning as a consultant, an advisor, a 1099 employee in a way. That is a subcontractor to come in, perform an audit, and say, and here is a good way that you can go about resolving this situation. So when I go out and do an audit, it's typically when a company has said, you know, we're not getting a lot out of our internal audits, or we're about to upgrade this system, or we've had a merger and we need to coordinate these quality management systems. We need someone who can come in and give us a thorough, quick, not take 6 weeks to do it, can work very effectively because you do it all the time, evaluation of our system and help us see what we need to do to upgrade to whatever it is we want to get done. So when I go in and perform an audit with people, the first thing I do is I sit down with management. We talk about this in our process-based audit class that will be offered May 24th and 25th. So those of you who have done audits and want to get better at it or feel like your auditors may need some advanced skills, it is an advanced audit class. It assumes people already know how to audit. You'll all be getting information and coupons for it in the next week, but it's a competitively priced offering, and we talk about how to do this technique right here. Auditor's job is to verify that we're meeting the requirements of the quality management system. Because if they're just watching how you do it when they're following along, it's like running a red light with a cop behind you. Everyone knows how to do things right. So what auditors are looking for is exceptions to the rules, and they'll start with things like customer complaints or charts and graphs that show that we're not meeting the target and we're not getting any better toward it. Or we had a big glitch 2 months ago, and we just simply hoped it never happened. We fixed it, and we hoped it never happened again. We didn't actually open a corrective action against why did that happen. They'll be looking for past examples of failure to follow procedures with the answer, oh, we retrained everyone. Well, retraining might not be the answer. So what auditors are looking for is what changed to eliminate the failure. Now, corrective action is one of the 6 required procedures within ISO 9001. And one of the things that changed in the release of ISO 9001 that just came out late last year, it wasn't really a change. It was a stronger statement of what they meant all along, is that when you perform a corrective action, it's not enough to go back in and say, oh, yes, something happened. We have a signed form here that says something happened, a procedure was changed, or a person was retrained, or the line was relayed out or something, or the whatever happened. What you have to do, according to ISO 9001, and what your third-party auditors, your registrars are going to be strict on this year, is did the change actually eliminate the failure? Did it induce new failures? Did it cause problems for other parts of the business that make you not want to stick with it in the future? What auditors are going to look for is how do you solve problems once and for all? they'll take a sample of your corrective action, and they'll say, did you just throw a document at it? Or did you actually look at what caused the problem to happen and say, you know what, the procedure was too hard to follow in the first place, or the drawing could not be understood, or the people who used to do this left and no one really has given some thought to a better way to organize the process so the work gets done on time or gets done properly. So auditor's role is to make sure the business is capable of solving problems consistently so that the customer gets what they want. So when you're talking about implementing ISO 9001, what it's all lined up to do is performing the job consistently to get the results that you want, following the process to get the results, rather than having the diving catch to get the results. And you say, hey, the customer got what they wanted, but gee, it was a miracle it came through. So auditors will typically look at your corrective action process, and the way they'll look at your corrective action process is to look at examples of customer complaints, goals that aren't met, and past examples of failure to follow procedures such as audit reports and stories that people tell them about, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe when we had the shutdown last year. So an auditor is looking to see that you don't run your business by the diving catch, that you don't run it by the all-nighter, you don't run it by the starvation diet. How many analogies can I work into one heading? My goodness. My partners hate this about me, that everything with me is an analogy, and all too often every analogy is about food. I think I've mostly avoided, except the starvation diet, I've avoided my food analogies. But food preparation is a process that most people can relate to, so I use it in a lot of my examples. Anyway, what you want is an effective system for permanently eliminating the causes of problems. That's actually one of the top benefits of implementing ISO 9001. A company that is, that's in startup mode and everyone's scrambling. And I was dealing with a client last year with a company here in Texas that it's actually the U.S. office, so a U.S. sales office for an Asian company. They said, Karen, we are the world's largest startup. I mean, this is a company that's making money hand over fist, selling products that are very much needed in the marketplace, and everybody likes what they buy from them. But the guy said, peel the curtain back and you will see that we're the world's largest startup, largest and oldest startup. He said that they are constantly, and I think part of it is the pace of change, the growth rate, the new product introduction rate. They always feel like they're reinventing the wheel. Well, if your business is reinventing the wheel, come up with a wheel reinvention process. You know, I mean, if you know you're constantly going to be dealing with change and dealing with new products and opening new offices, you better be sure you have a system for managing the process. Now, I started with a company that was growing by leaps and bounds as an employee some years back, and I felt like when I walked in the door, it was George Jetson. You know, like they kind of pushed me through the door and put me through the new employee orientation. I mean, I went through the orientation process. The next morning when I showed up at my desk, there was my computer with stuff already loaded. I mean, my computer with stuff already loaded onto it for me to do. All the forms and everything that I needed just popped up as I needed them. I got automatic reminders for things. They were like clockwork. They knew how to onboard new employees because they did it so often. So process management says set it up so that you're not constantly scrambling, and it means not just for new things that happen, but for all the fires that you know that typically happen, you know, all the problems that typically happen. So how do you know what the problems really are, and how do you know if you've actually solved them? Well, process management is saying it's not just the results that matter, it's how we get the results that matters in the long run. The end does not justify the means, and what you're doing with ISO 9001 is saying we want to properly ensure that your process can consistently produce the desired results. The way you do that is you set up your processes with in-process measurements before the last step. So imagine, and I'm going to go to a food analogy now. You're making pizza, and you've got them all lined up across the countertop. They're about to go in the oven. And you say, oh my gosh, it burned. Well, wouldn't it have been nice if somebody had checked to see that the thermostat, you know, that the setting on the oven actually met the temperature that was in the oven? Was it reading properly? Your oven was too hot. So monitor your process before the stuff comes out the end of the line. Certainly don't leave it to your customers to find out. And one of my favorite places in business to deal with this is on-time delivery. Because I worked in production for enough years, I know what it feels like to be the last person that touched the product and take the blame for it. Well, look, if sales had told the client it was a 6-week, told the customers a 6-week cycle time, and they used up 3 weeks getting the client through credit check, good luck getting production to make it in the last 3 weeks. You know, I mean, there are processes all along the way, and you can't blame the last guy that touched it. Everybody's been in that position of saying, oh, we'll make it up at the end of the line. So use the data on each of the steps in the process to line out those processes to reduce variation and waste so that no one process has to make up all the lost time for everyone else. I'll tell you what, data-driven, consistent processes will beat the highly attentive, motivated, but inconsistent individual every time. There's no way you can inspect quality in or rely on that guy with the calibrated eyeballs. I actually had a guy in a factory with calibrated muscles. He lifted up a box, and it was a box the size of a desk and was about 18 inches tall. It was fairly lightweight, a lot of plastic and stuff inside it. He picked it up and he said, this doesn't feel right. When he opened it up, he realized that that box and several more that came down the line at the same time were missing the binder of documentation that was supposed to go in there. It was Brian's calibrated arms that saved everyone from a problem, rather than the system on the line that said when something runs out, you stop the line and refill it, rather than have the person run off and get it and say, oh, I'll catch those before they ship. So a data-driven, consistent process is what ISO 9001 is designed to give you. Now, if you've got people in your business who are saying, we don't need all this ISO stuff, just bring them back to that line. Really, that's what ISO 9001 is about. Having you set up a data-driven, consistent process that will allow you to stop working the overtime and fighting the fires and having the diving catch at the end of the day to make sure the customer gets what they want. Okay, to recap here, I told you about what is in ISO 9001. I told you how mom and dad set their goals, built their house, had their documented work instructions for cleaning the kitchen, and checked the spelling test. That is, you want to have the we'll go over a little slide on that in just a second. They didn't document the process, but when you got more than 6 people running around, you're probably going to need your documentation, and you need it to be just right. Corrective action is where the auditor is going to start to say, well, I know you set it up. Let's talk about when things went wrong. And do you actually have a process for finding out what those problems were and fixing them? Can I trust you to fix the problems that come out, that actually make it out the door? And then process management is the key to ISO 9001 that says avoid the diving catch. Find out what the problems are before they get any further along in the process so that you can make sure that, that you don't waste your money at the end of the line fixing problems that shouldn't have happened in the first place. So here's the summary. It says you want to have goals. I'm actually going to go to the next slide on this because it's a little more descriptive. Oops, hit 2 there. You want to, in corporate terms, you want to have goals. Top management is responsible for establishing the policy, the objectives, the plans, and who has authority. Top management makes sure communication channels exist, and top management reviews progress. Top management is checking the results of the processes and the product to say, do we want different goals, better goals that meet the marketplace better. Second, resources. Management has to ensure the business has sufficient infrastructure, work areas, and trained employees to achieve the defined objectives. The next one, methods. For product realization, the business has to plan and carry out its processes for taking orders, developing products, purchasing material and services, and producing the product or service under controlled, consistent conditions using calibrated equipment where required. You could put this up on the wall, and it really, if somebody doesn't understand ISO 9001, this explains it. You have to perform the checks of the process, collect and analyze the data on customer satisfaction, whether products and services are meeting requirements, and whether the processes are effective. You have to make changes to the processes to eliminate the causes of problems and to ensure that defects are removed and not repeated. And finally, what this all depends on is a documented system that the business has to keep and keeps records of the fulfillment of requirements. That's ISO on one page for you, ISO 9001. Now next week, actually I guess it'll come tomorrow, but you can download next week. And it's worded in a kind of a funny way. Once you get the email, you can probably click right over to our site and download the stuff. It'll probably be there, but wait till Monday to be sure it's there. Because I have a webmaster that sometimes doesn't like to work on weekends. I'm gonna get on him about that. We have a little process improvement to do there. But you can download this. You can share it with colleagues. But what I'd like you to do is make a list right now. What did you hear today that you can use immediately? Who do you want to share this information with? Or what do you want to do to learn more about this material so that you can share it with your organization? I'll stay on the phone. You can call me later or stay on the phone now to talk about questions you may have. And if you'd like this expand or customized for your company, I'm certainly willing to do that. There's a lot of stuff through your ASQ chapter. We have our learning labs, I call them here, or our virtual training courses. We have limited versions of them where it's really a coaching format, and we have classroom style that are virtual format that can that you can drink through a fire hose and get it all at once. I suggest the cross-functional workshop and a combination of those things together. Finally, remember we've got the Productivity Reset, June 29th and 30th and July 1st. Total cost of $797 per site, who you can cram into a conference room. And we will be having the virtual training course on process-based audits on May 25th and 26th. So with that, I made it with 2 minutes to spare, but I will stay on the line. I'm going to give people a chance to ring off. It looks like I've got several people who are still muted, so I'm going to unmute Babette, Brian, and Luis. I've clicked you. You are unmuted. Anyone else who is still muted just needs to enter their code, and they can sign in and be able to ask questions. So for now, I'll say goodbye to everyone, but I'm staying on the call for anyone who'd like to discuss further and stay on the line. So thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you in some of our upcoming classes and at the event at the end of the month. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.